The 2003 NBA Draft has already established a reputation as one of the greatest collection of players to ever enter the league at the same time. Headlined by future Hall of Famers LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, and Carmelo Anthony, the 2003 draft class has given us some of the best storylines in recent NBA memory and one of the best players to ever play the game of basketball. Yes, when we look back at the 2003 draft from the perspective of LeBron James, it almost seems like the beginning of a perfect story. As of course, the team with the #1 pick, the Cleveland Cavaliers, just so happened to be the hometown team of the high school phenom fans were already calling King James. But what if we could go back and change everything? What if for some reason LeBron decided he wasn't ready for the NBA in 2003 and instead chose to play 1 year at college, specifically at Ohio State? LeBron himself has been quoted as saying, "I promise, I say this all the time, if I had 1 year of college, I would have ended up here." And so we know that with this single decision, the entire NBA landscape will change. The only question is, by how much? So let's begin our journey with the new 2003 NBA draft. This draft class is still loaded, but with LeBron missing, a few things were bound to change. Which means with the first overall pick in the draft, the Cleveland Cavaliers now select former NCAA champion Carmelo Anthony. Now eventually, Melo will prove to be a future top 10 player in this NBA, but losing one of the top 5 players of all time will certainly hurt the Cavs. The next notable change in this draft comes with the 3rd pick, where the Nuggets can no longer take Melo and instead wind up with Chris Bosh. That is a pretty good consolation pick, but the same cannot be said for the Raptors, who are forced to pick Chris Kaman at 4. Finishing up the important changes here, the Clippers now take TJ Ford at 6, Dwayne Wade still goes to the Heat, and let's move on to the 2004 season. We're going to move past this season pretty quickly as we have a lot of ground to cover here. So just know that the Raptors lose 6 games without Chris Bosh, and with Bosh, the Nuggets also lose 4 more games as they have no good small forward on their roster. And yes, the Pistons still win the championship, and so we arrive at the 2004 NBA draft, aka the arrival of LeBron James to the league. And because not much has changed, the Orlando Magic still pick first, which means
with the first pick in the 2004 NBA draft, the Orlando Magic select LeBron James.
Yup, LeBron James replaces Dwight on the Magic, as Cavs fans curse the young king for choosing to play a year in college. And speaking of Dwight Howard, he can't go to the Magic anymore, so instead, he's drafted by the Toronto Raptors, who are now picking 2nd due to the loss of Chris Bosh. Howard will prove to be an upgrade over Bosh, which means both the Magic and the Raptors are winners here, and so are the Clippers, who are no longer able to take Shaun Livingston at 4 and instead settle for Andre Iguodala at 8. Rounding out this draft, the Bulls take Emeka, the Hawks grab Ben Gordon, which takes us to the start of the 2005 season, the official arrival of LeBron James, and immediately he begins to make a major impact. Playing without Dwight, the Magic now seamlessly rotate Grant Hill, Hedo Turkoglu, and LeBron at the 3 and the 4 spots, which causes some matchup nightmares. Meanwhile, the Cavs lose 8 more games as they miss the monster sophomore season that the original LeBron had, and the Bobcats lose 4 more games because Shaun Livingston is just not a good rookie point guard. Wrapping up the year, Dwight is able to lead the Raptors to 4 more wins, the Spurs still win the finals, Nash is still MVP, and LeBron is now Rookie of the Year in Orlando. Now again, it's drafting time, and in the 2005 NBA draft, the Charlotte Bobcats move up a pick, which means
with the 4th pick in the 2004 NBA draft, the Charlotte Bobcats select Chris Paul from Wake Forest University.
Yup, the Bobcats can now build their franchise around a future Hall of Fame point guard instead of a guy who looks like he ate a Hall of Fame point guard. Just kidding, Raymond, but yeah, have fun trying to replace CP3 in New Orleans. Looking at the bottom of the lottery, the Raptors just took 2 big men in their last 2 drafts and are starting Joey Graham at small forward, so they take the best small forward available and luck into future scoring star Danny Granger, which is great news for Canada, horrible news for Indiana. This brings us to the 2006 season, where immediately Chris Paul begins to go to work. In Charlotte, CP3 wins Rookie of the Year as he leads the Bobcats to 11 more wins and the 8th seed in the East, which means it's no surprise that the team that lost Paul, the Hornets, lose 8 extra games without their young star. And speaking of young stars, the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs features 2 of the game's brightest, as LeBron James leads the Magic to the 4 seed in a first round matchup against Melo and the Cavs. On paper, this looks like a near even matchup, but in reality, this is LeBron James' true coming out party. Cavs fans can only watch in horror as LeBron averages 32 points and 10 rebounds a game while leading the Magic to a sweep over the Cavs. Unfortunately for the King though, his first playoff run ends against the 64-win Pistons in round 2, but now, with his first taste of playoff basketball, LeBron vows to do whatever it takes to start collecting championship rings. But before that can happen, we have to look at the 2006 NBA draft. In this draft, the Raptors somehow managed to get lucky again and move down in the draft, which means instead of Andrea Bargnani, they get 4 years of a healthy Brandon Roy. This change is a big one, and so is the 4th pick in this draft, as the Chicago Bulls already have enough big men with Emeka Okafor on the roster, but still need a wing, so they take Rudy Gay. Now, we're in the offseason, where we have our first new meaningful trade. In this deal, the Magic, who have way too many wings but no good center, trade Hedo Turkoglu and Keon Dooling to the Denver Nuggets for Nene, as Denver has plenty of big men but need a new starting small forward because they no longer have Melo. And with their new additions in the 2007 season, the Orlando Magic established themselves as a future championship contender with an impressive 50 wins. This certainly has people talking, but somehow another young team in the East manages to play even better than Orlando, as the Toronto Raptors become the NBA's best up-and-coming team as their luck in the last few drafts begins to pay off big time. And in the playoffs, the Raptors proved this was no fluke, as while LeBron has a monster postseason and leads Orlando to the Eastern Conference Finals, he is again sent home as the Raptors win a tough-fought series in 6 games. This means that the Toronto Raptors reach their first ever NBA Finals, but they are simply no match for a veteran Spurs team that features Tim Duncan in his prime, so it's the San Antonio Spurs who finished this year as NBA champs. And before we get to the 2007 NBA draft, let's pause for a minute to admire the great fortune of the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks defy the odds and jump from the 7th pick to the 1st, which means
At the 7th pick in the 2007 NBA draft, the Atlanta Hawks select Greg Oden from Ohio State University.
Did I say great fortune? I meant disgusting luck, as instead of landing Al Horford, the Hawks end up with one of the NBA's biggest busts in Greg Oden. It's the 2nd pick that actually sees an amazing turn of events, as the Trailblazers avoid Greg Oden and instead are forced to take Kevin Durant. Portland fans, if you want to cry, I don't blame you. Moving down a pick, the Hornets still need a franchise point guard as Chris Paul is in Charlotte, so they take Mike Conley, which means Al Horford is taken 4th by the Grizzlies. And it's time for the 2008 season. In 2008, the Magic actually take a step back and lose 4 more games as Nene misses almost the entire year with an injury. The Hawks and Hornets also take heavy losses this year, as do the Cavs, as Melo struggles to lead a subpar roster. The Blazers also lose a few games, even though Kevin Durant is named the NBA's Rookie of the Year. Meanwhile, on the winning side of all this, the Bobcats win a solid 43 games as Chris Paul proves to the league that he's a future all-time great. And the Raptors continue to impress with 57 wins and another trip to the Eastern Conference Finals. The most surprising team this season, though, has to be the Nuggets, who come out of nowhere and earn the top seed in the Western Conference as Hedo Turkoglu plays out of his mind while Chris Bosh plays even better and is awarded with a 2nd-team All-NBA selection. With that said, though, the Boston Celtics still have their big 3, the Lakers still have a dominant team led by Kobe, and that means history repeats itself and the Celtics still beat the Lakers in the 2008 NBA Finals. Now, looking at this new NBA as a whole, so far the Indiana Pacers have not had the best luck, but that changes when the Pacers land the number 1 pick with just the 9th best odds, which means
With the first pick in the 2008 NBA draft, the Indiana Pacers select Derrick Rose from the University of Memphis.
Sorry, Bulls fans, including myself, this new NBA seems to hate hometown heroes playing for their hometown teams. Moving on, the next big change we have comes with the Knicks at number 5, as New York fans are convinced that former high school phenom OJ Mayo is the player who will finally lead them to greatness. They are incorrect. This means that Danilo Gallinari finds a new home with the Memphis Grizzlies at 7, Melo and the Cavs get some help with Roy Hibbert at pick 12, and before we go to the 2009 season, there is one change to announce in free agency. The Clippers avoid making a colossal mistake and do not sign Baron Davis, as TJ Ford is actually fresh off a season that saw him finish with a 20 PER, and so it's the Bulls who instead take the bait and sign a washed up Baron Davis to a big contract. Now, we're at the 2009 season, where the Bobcats and Raptors continue to impress with their new additions, the Sixers completely fall off without Andre Iguodala and Thaddeus Young, and the Cavs have a pretty good year but lose 12 more games without LeBron. The reason for this is that this is LeBron's first ever MVP season, as with LeBron absolutely torching every team Orlando plays, the Magic go from winning 48 games in 2008 to 67 in 2009, an absurd 19 game improvement. This team proves just how good they are in the 2009 playoffs, as just like in the original 2009 playoffs, the Magic roll through the Eastern Conference and find the Los Angeles Lakers as the only team standing in their way to NBA immortality. Instantly, the 2009 finals become one of the most hyped up playoff series in recent sports history, as for the first time, NBA legend Kobe Bryant is forced to defend his throne against basketball's next big star. When his career is over, Kobe will certainly remember this as one of his greatest challenges, and he'll also remember this as one of his greatest accomplishments. Yes, despite this new look Magic, the Lakers are still able to earn another banner as Kobe wins his first championship without Shaq. And so we arrive at the 2009 NBA draft, where big changes continue to alter the landscape of the league. In this new NBA, the Washington Wizards are given the first pick, and so
with the first pick in the 2009 NBA draft, the Washington Wizards select Blake Griffin.
Yes, Blake Griffin is now a Wizard, which means there will be no Lob City, but I'm sure DC fans don't mind. And looking at the second pick, another giant change takes place, as the Timberwolves are in desperate need of a guard, and so they take future MVP candidate James Harden. Moving along, the fourth pick gives us the first new draft day trade in this scenario. And it's a big one, because the Bulls currently have 2 starting quality centers in Emeka Okafor and Joakim Noah, so they're willing to let one of them go. Meanwhile, the Thunder are in desperate need of a young center and think Noah can pair well with their young nucleus of Russell Westbrook and Jeff Green, so the Thunder trade their number 4 pick to the Bulls for Joakim Noah, and the Bulls use that pick to take Tyreek Evans. From there, Ricky Rubio goes to the Kings, DeMar DeRozan becomes a Pacer, Chicago tries to replace Derrick Rose with Drew Holiday, and now we're in the 2009 offseason. In this offseason, OKC continues to make moves, and because the Grizzlies do not need Zach Randolph because they already have Al Horford, the Thunder are able to steal Randolph for Cephalosha and some salary throw-ins. And now it's the 2010 season, and again, it's the Magic that are the Eastern Conference's best team. They win 67 games, and again, LeBron is named MVP. In the West, the loss of Carmelo hurts the Nuggets, as Bosh and company win 46 games, but somehow missed the playoffs in a loaded Western Conference. This new West includes an emerging powerhouse in the 61-win Portland Trailblazers, as in the 2010 season, Kevin Durant takes the leap and is named first team All-NBA. But again, when the dust settles this year, the NBA Finals are the same as the year before. Yes, again we have Kobe and the Lakers matched up against LeBron and the Magic. This time though, the Lakers find that LeBron James has become hardened with the playoff losses he has experienced. Playing for a team that no longer has any interest in his mom, LeBron locks in and wins his first championship in 7 games. This of course brings us to the 2010 NBA draft, where the Clippers have the first pick, which means
with the first pick in the 2010 NBA draft, the Los Angeles Clippers select John Wall from the University of Kentucky.
So no, Clippers fans won't get to experience Lob City, but at least they have John Wall. Wizards fans aren't too angry with the loss of Wall though, as they are able to take DeMarcus Cousins with the 3rd pick, which saves DeMarcus from the black hole that is Sacramento. Instead, it's Derek Favors who takes a trip to space, and looking at the 6th pick, the Thunder already have enough big men, but they desperately need a small forward to replace Durant. So they take the best one available in Paul George. Pacers fans, remember how I said your luck was turning around? I take that back. Wrapping this up, the Sixers get Greg Monroe at 8, the Timberwolves really need a point guard, so they take Eric Bledsoe, and now we're in the famous summer of 2010. Of course, originally this summer, LeBron James took his talents to South Beach. Luckily though, that horrible NBA moment never happens, because LeBron's now on a championship squad, so why would he leave? The Heat are still able to get Chris Bosh though, and they replace LeBron with Joe Johnson, who decides to leave Atlanta because they've been noticeably worse without Al Horford. The 2010 offseason wraps up with the Timberwolves keeping Al Jefferson because they are now a near playoff team, and let's jump to the 2011 season. Before we look at the standings for this year, let's talk about the in-season trades. Yes, the Knicks still trade for Melo, but now their package includes OJ Mayo instead of Danilo Gallinari. The Nets are also still able to trade for Darren Williams because they offer the best package available, but the Jazz are forced to take Ed Davis instead of Derek Favors because New Jersey doesn't have Derek Favors. Finally, the Sixers are now in full tank mode, so they trade Elton Brand to the Pacers for Mike Dunleavy, Jeff Foster, and 2 future 2nd round picks. With these moves out of the way, let's take a look at the 2011 Eastern Conference standings. In this new NBA, the Hawks, Pistons, Heat, and Sixers all take huge losses to their records. And while the Bobcats and Magic technically improve, Chris Paul and LeBron are still unhappy because they want to be competing for a title. That said, the biggest story in the East this season is the Chicago Bulls, who do lose 3 more games without Derrick Rose's original MVP season, but still finish first in the East as Okafor, Gay, Tyreek, and Drew combine to nearly match the team's original production, while the Timberwolves win a staggering 20 more games as both Kevin Love and James Harden begin to showcase their star potential. Despite these all-around massive changes though, the playoffs end up the same way, as the Mavericks still win the championship as Dirk has a historic playoff run that ends with a 5-game series victory against the Magic. Now we arrive at the 2011 NBA draft, and in this draft, TJ Ford becomes a hero. Remember, because Ford played so well in the 2008 season, the Clippers never signed Baron Davis. That means that the Clippers also never traded away their 1st round pick to the Cavs, and that means
With the first pick in the 2011 NBA draft, the Los Angeles Clippers select Kyrie Irving from Duke University.
yes, Kyrie Irving joins John Wall in a very interesting experiment in LA. Moving down, Tristan Thompson goes to the Kings, Valanciunas heads to Utah, Kemba tries to replace Kyrie in Cleveland, and most importantly, the Timberwolves currently have Bledsoe, Harden, Kevin Love, and Al Jefferson, which means they need a small forward, so they take the best one available, a steal by the name of Kawhi Leonard. Jumping a few months into the future, it's now the 2012 season. Remember, originally in 2012, Chris Paul made it clear he wanted out of New Orleans. However, because the Bobcats were a 5 seed in 2011, Chris tries to give it one more season in Charlotte, but the team fails miserably as they win just 23 games. The Bobcats try to trade him at the deadline, but Chris won't commit to signing a long-term deal with any team that's interested. Now, this is a shortened season, and some people found it boring, but in this scenario, there is a huge storyline that's dominating the headlines. Last season, the Minnesota Timberwolves missed the playoffs, but this season, they find themselves as the top seed in the Western Conference, and Kevin Love, after averaging 26 points and 13 rebounds for the league's best team, is named the NBA's MVP. Talk about crazy. Unfortunately, though, the playoffs are seen as less than crazy, as the Magic with LeBron somehow fall apart and lose to the Knicks in the first round. From there, it's the Spurs and the Celtics who reach the finals, with San Antonio bringing home yet another championship. And so now we arrive at the 2012 NBA draft, where the Nets should have the first pick, but they're the Nets, so they owe that pick to Utah, which means
with the first pick in the 2012 NBA draft, the Utah Jazz select
Anthony Davis.
Thank God, Anthony Davis avoids New Orleans and now has a chance to actually play in the playoffs for a few seasons. Other big changes in this draft include Bradley Beal moving to Philadelphia, the Bobcats replacing Chris Paul with Damian Lillard, and the Hornets attempting to replace AD with Andre Drummond. And yes, I just said the Bobcats are replacing Chris Paul because Chris Paul declines his player option and becomes a free agent. And wouldn't you know it, the Orlando Magic, fresh off an embarrassing first round defeat, are looking for some new blood. So Chris Paul joins LeBron in Orlando in what is sure to be a championship duo. Finishing up their offseason, the Magic also signed Jamal Crawford and re-signed Ryan Anderson, giving them the shooting they need to be legitimate championship contenders. Those were some huge moves, but we're not done yet. The Clippers now find themselves with an awkward roster, and they want some star power of their own. So they trade Eric Gordon, Chauncey Billups, and their 11th pick to the Raptors for Dwight Howard. And now, because they have Dwight, DeAndre Jordan is expandable, so the Clippers trade him to Portland, a team that needs a center, for some much needed help on the wing in Nicholas Batum. And still, this offseason is not over. The Thunder have too many big men as well, but they really need a shooting guard, which means OKC trades Zach Randolph and Reggie Jackson to the Pacers for JJ Redick, Elton Brand's expiring contract, and 2 future first-round picks. Finishing off this summer, the Wizards make an awesome move and sign Goran Dragic, while the Trailblazers get the point guard they desperately need in Kyle Lowry, which means finally, we arrive at the 2013 regular season. In this season, the Clippers become the #1 seed in the West behind their new additions, while the Trailblazers also make a big move and finish 6th. Again though, the big story in the West proves to be all about Minnesota, as in the playoffs, James Harden and Kevin Love absolutely go off and power the Wolves to the NBA Finals. In these finals, Minnesota is met by the new-look Orlando Magic, who now feature Chris Paul and LeBron James. And in what surely must feel like a dream for Chris Paul, Orlando just proves to be too much, as LeBron finds new life with his superstar teammate and puts up an absurd triple-double stat line in a 6-game finals win. Now, looking at the 2013 NBA draft, we can admit that things are kind of boring here. So quickly, Oladipo goes to the Pistons, Porter goes to Houston, the Pelicans get CJ McCollum, and now let's look at the offseason. In this summer, because the Thunder need JJ and the Clippers need Andre Iguodala, neither of these players are traded. Looking at someone who is traded, the Wizards really need another guard to help their core of Dragic, Blake, and Cousins. So they trade Trevor Ariza to the Spurs for George Hill. Rounding up this offseason, Paul Millsap signs with the Pelicans instead of the Hawks because Atlanta is no longer a playoff team or really good at all. And now it's the 2014 season. In this season, the East is in for a surprise as the Magic coast a little too much and the Wizards jump out in front and secure the #1 seed behind the unstoppable big men duo of Blake and Cousins. This is hardly the NBA's most important storyline though, as the Western Conference has become absolutely loaded. At times, the Timberwolves look like the best team, but they finish just 5th in the West, as the Thunder begin to come together behind the scoring of Russell Westbrook and Paul George, and a Defensive Player of the Year season from Joakim Noah. Meanwhile, the Portland Trailblazers manage to outperform everyone, with a ridiculous team that features Kyle Lowry, LaMarcus Aldridge, and DeAndre Jordan as wingmen to Kevin Durant, who, by the way, wins the league's MVP. The Trailblazers win a league-high 67 games and continue their winning ways all the way to the NBA Finals. In the East, the Magic are able to pick things up when the games count and beat the Wizards in the Eastern Conference Finals, giving us a finals matchup between the league's 2 best players, LeBron James and Kevin Durant. In this finals, LeBron again plays like an absolute beast, and Chris Paul has a historic performance with a 34-point, 18-assist outburst in Game 5. But it's the Trailblazers who prove to be too much, as Portland wins Game 7 at home by 4 points and becomes NBA champions. And we're at the 2014 NBA draft, and so far in this scenario, Lakers fans haven't had much to cheer for. That changes as they receive the first pick, and so,
with the first pick in the 2014 NBA draft, the Los Angeles Lakers select Andrew Wiggins from Toronto.
Yes, Andrew Wiggins becomes a Laker and Jabari Parker becomes a Detroit Piston, which is definitely meaningful, but the most massive change that happens here is that the Bucks are not able to select Parker and instead take a man by the name of Joel Embiid, which means eventually this league will have to try and figure out how to possibly beat both Giannis and Embiid on the same team. Good luck. Several other changes occur in this draft that aren't as important. Pause if you want to check them out. But we have to speed things up here because we have another busy offseason. In free agency, the Magic are now desperate for a big man, and because the Wizards already have Blake and DeMarcus, it's Orlando who signs Marcin Gortat. And because the Bulls are no longer the contenders they once were, Pau Gasol signs with the Spurs instead of Chicago. Finishing things off, just know that the Suns do not trade away Isaiah Thomas because they need him as they don't have Eric Bledsoe or Goran Dragic. Sorry, Boston fans, this scenario's kinda screwing you. Anyway, now we're in the 2015 regular season, and again in the East, it is the Orlando Magic again making a run to the finals. In the West, the Trailblazers make a remarkable fall as Kevin Durant misses almost the entire year with injury, which means the Blazers don't even make the playoffs. That doesn't mean the West isn't still loaded though, as the Golden State Warriors have a breakout year and win 63 games behind the incredible play of Steph Curry. However, Steph does not win this year's MVP like he did before. As the previous MVP runner-up, James Harden manages to outduel Steph and leads the Timberwolves to the top seed in the West, earning Harden his first MVP. Moving on to the playoffs, Kevin Love still suffers a season-ending injury in the first round, so that means it's the Warriors who end up winning the Western Conference Finals against the Spurs in 6 games. This brings us to a familiar matchup, LeBron versus the 2015 Golden State Warriors. However, unlike in the original 2015 finals where LeBron was forced to play without the second and third best players on his team, the 2015 Magic are healthy. In this final series, Chris Paul outplays Steph, Marcin Gortat scores several key baskets off of dimes from CP3, and LeBron proves that he is a top 5 player of all time. The Magic win their 3rd championship of the LeBron era, and the Warriors go home wondering what went wrong. Which brings us to the 2015 draft, and Knicks fans, I know you love Porzingis, but don't worry, even though you do lose him, you still have the first pick, which means
With the first pick in the 2015 NBA Draft, the New York Knicks select Karl Anthony Towns from the University of Kentucky.
you have to admit, replacing Kristaps with Cat is very interesting. And looking at the rest of this draft, it's the Detroit Pistons who look out, while the Nuggets wind up with D'Angelo Russell instead of Moutier, and the Sixers try their best to replace the loss of Embiid with Miles Turner. In the 2015 offseason, LaMarcus does not leave Portland because they are now a super team. Moving on, we're at the 2016 regular season. In the East, the Magic again dominate everyone and reach the NBA Finals, but let's take some time to talk about a different team for a change, the Indiana Pacers. In 2016, DeMar DeRozan begins to dominate, and with the help of Derrick Rose, Reggie Jackson, and Zach Randolph, the Pacers finish 2nd in the East and make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. Again though, they're still beaten by the Magic even though Chris Paul misses the series with an injury. Meanwhile, in the West, let's again focus on some different teams for a change. The Pelicans win an impressive 17 extra games behind the pick and roll duo of Mike Conley and Andre Drummond, and with help from an emerging CJ McCollum and the steady play of Paul Millsap inside. And while Anthony Davis is no longer a part of this team in New Orleans, he is able to lead the Jazz to the 8th seed as he begins to put up MVP type numbers, while Jonas Valanciunas proves himself as a steady force at center. With all of this said though, nothing can stop the Golden State Warriors this season. This is a Warriors team that is fresh off a 2015 finals loss, and they prove game in and game out that they are on a mission of revenge. Golden State takes down Portland in 7 games in the Western Conference Finals, and then in the NBA Finals with Chris Paul on the bench, the Warriors are simply too much and are named the 2016 NBA champions. And now we are in the final draft of this scenario, and it's the Lakers who again pick first, and so
With the first pick in the 2016 NBA Draft, the Los Angeles Lakers select Ben Simmons
Ben Simmons pairs with Andrew Wiggins in what will certainly be a very fun to watch Lakers squad. Meanwhile, the Celtics end up with Brandon Ingram, which might be a bad thing, as Jaylen Brown will later prove to be an awesome pick by the Rockets at 4. Which brings us to our final offseason, and we still have some major moves to make. Because the Celtics are no longer a threat in the East, Al Horford instead signs with the Thunder. And to nobody's surprise, Dwight is unhappy with the current Clippers team, which means Dwight leaves LA and joins up with a championship-hungry Minnesota squad as Thad Young and Al Jefferson are sent to the Clippers to make this signing work. And now, guys, we are in the final season of this long and very complicated scenario. In the East, we find that the process has sped up quite a bit, as Bradley Beal and Miles Turner both take a leap and lead the Sixers to 48 wins. And if we take a look at Detroit, we find that the Pistons have also put together a very promising young team, as Porzingis begins to develop into a star, while Oladipo has a much improved season as he's actually allowed to touch the ball. When it comes down to it though, the East is still dominated by the Magic and the Wizards, and it's still the Orlando Magic who come out on top, reaching the NBA Finals for the 80th time in LeBron's career. Meanwhile, the West has given us 3 absolute powerhouse teams, as the Timberwolves, Trailblazers, and Warriors spend the season battling for the top seed and home court advantage in the playoffs. Eventually, it is the Timberwolves who finish with the top seed and an easier path to the Western Conference Finals, which they take advantage of. In these Western Conference Finals, they are met by the Golden State Warriors, who are fresh off an epic Game 7 victory over the Blazers, as the series wasn't decided until the final seconds when Steph set up Klay Thompson for a game-winning jumper. We're also going to fast forward to Game 7 here, and it's in this Game 7 where Kawhi Leonard becomes a Minnesota legend, as he scores 26 points in the first half. From there, the Warriors try their best to come back, but their shots just aren't falling, and so the Orlando Magic and Minnesota Timberwolves meet for the 2017 NBA Finals. And I wish I could tell you this was a happy ending for LeBron. I wish I could tell you he finished his own scenario with another championship ring. But in games 1 and 2, the Magic try their best to clamp down on Harden and Kawhi, and so it's Eric Bledsoe and Kevin Love who go off. The two combine for 50 points in Game 1 and then 62 points in Game 2. By the time the Magic can change up their game plan, it's too late. And shockingly, it's the Minnesota Timberwolves who win the 2017 NBA championship.